Houston was facing an impossible choice. Two colossal dams holding back a weight of water the engineers had never conceived were hours from total failure. A failure that would send a wall of water into the heart of the fourth largest city in America. So the Army Corps of Engineers made a decision. A calculated, desperate decision. They would open the floodgates. They would sacrifice thousands of homes to save hundreds of thousands more. Not a risk of flooding, a certainty. A guarantee. They were choosing who to drown first. If you live near a dam, a levee, or any piece of infrastructure that holds the water back, tell us about it in the comments below. Your local story is a critical piece of this national puzzle. This wasn't an act of God. It was an act of engineering, pushed to its absolute limit. For decades, these dams had stood as silent guardians over Houston. But here's the secret nobody talked about. They weren't built to protect the homes that now stood in their shadow. Those homes were built in the one place they were never ever supposed to be. In the basin designed to flood. An astonishing number of you who follow these critical investigations haven't subscribed. This isn't just about views, it's about creating a community that is informed and prepared. Take 1 second, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you never miss what's coming next. It's that important. Let's begin. The story of the Addicks and Barker dams is not a story about water. It's a story about land and the belief that we could control it. In the early 20th century, Houston was a city at the mercy of its own geography. Flat, low-lying, and crisscrossed by sluggish bayous, it was a landscape practically engineered for flooding. The Great Flood of 1935 was the breaking point. Buffalo Bayou, the city's main artery, swelled into a raging torrent, inundating the downtown core, paralyzing commerce, and costing the city millions. It was a catastrophe that exposed a fundamental vulnerability. Houston could not become the city of the future if it was constantly being washed away by its past. The response was audacious. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers proposed something that had never been done on this scale for flood control. Not a taller levee, not a wider channel. A pair of colossal earthen dams built miles to the west of the city on what was then empty coastal prairie. Their names were Addicks and Barker. Their purpose was singular, to capture storm runoff from the vast upstream watershed before it could ever reach the city's core. They were designed to be dry reservoirs, vast, empty bowls of land that would only hold water for a few days during and after an extreme rainfall event, before slowly releasing it downstream in a controlled, manageable flow. Construction began in the 1940s, two gigantic mounds of earth stretching for miles, rising from the flat terrain like ancient earthworks. Addicks was over 11 miles long, Barker over 13. Combined, they could hold over 400,000 acre-feet of water. To put that into terms that means something, that's enough water to cover the entire city of Houston in nearly a foot of water. The engineering was a product of its time. Solid, straightforward, and built for a climate that planners thought they understood. They were designed to contain a storm so severe it would only happen once in a millennium. They were a declaration of control, a line drawn in the dirt against the chaos of nature. It was not a permanent solution. It never was. The dams worked. For decades, they did exactly what they were designed to do. Storms rolled in, the reservoirs would partially fill, the water would be released, and downtown Houston would stay dry. The city boomed. Spurred by oil, aerospace, and an unshakable Texan optimism, Houston exploded outwards. The population doubled. Then it doubled again. And all that growth, all those people, all those houses, pushed relentlessly west. Directly toward the empty land the dams were built to protect, the land that was supposed to be empty, the land that was designed to flood. And yet, the building continued. Developers saw cheap, flat, available land. County officials, eager for an expanding tax base, saw progress. They approved subdivision after subdivision, plat after plat. Thousands of homes, schools, and businesses were built directly inside the government-owned land that constituted the Addicks and Barker reservoirs. Legally, the land belonged to the federal government. But in practice, it was a checkerboard of private property and public risk. Homeowners bought houses in pleasant suburban communities with no idea they were living inside a flood control facility. It wasn't on the seller's disclosure. It wasn't on the map in the sales office. It was a hidden fact, buried in decades-old engineering plans. A secret, kept in plain sight. The real problem wasn't just the homes, it was the dams themselves. By the 21st century, the structures that seemed so monumental in the 1940s were showing their age. They were earthen dams made of compacted soil and clay. Not the monolithic concrete structures people imagine when they hear the word dam. This design is common and effective, but it has a critical vulnerability. Seepage. Water can find pathways through, or, more terrifyingly, under the dam itself. If that seepage becomes too aggressive, it can begin to erode the dam from within, a process called internal erosion that can lead to a sudden, catastrophic failure. Does your town have an old piece of infrastructure you rely on? A bridge, a dam, a power grid? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear about these hidden vulnerabilities. In 2009, the Army Corps of Engineers gave both Addicks and Barker a Dam Safety Action classification of 1, the highest risk category available. That designation meant the dams were critically near failure, or were already experiencing failure. The Corps' own analysis was chilling. They determined there was a significant risk of catastrophic failure under conditions of a major flood. The ends of the dams where they met the concrete outlet structures were identified as a point of terrifying weakness. Water could exploit the joint between earth and concrete, carving a path that would lead to a total breach, a collapse. The Corps kept this information quiet for a time, concerned about inciting a public panic, not a possibility of failure, a probability. The Guardians of Houston were themselves considered 2 of the most dangerous dams in the United States. They spent over $75 million on emergency repairs, reinforcing the vulnerable outlet structures, trying to buy time, but they couldn't fix the original sin, the city that had grown up in the flood pool. Then came Harvey. Hurricane Harvey was not a storm, it was a biblical deluge. It stalled over southeast Texas for 4 days in August 2017, and in that time it dropped more than 27 trillion gallons of water on the region. Some areas saw more than 50 inches of rain. To put that in perspective, that's more rain than London receives in 2 full years, falling in less than a week. The bayous once again swelled, but this time, the scale was different. The water had nowhere to go. It flowed west, just as the original engineers had predicted, and began to fill the Addicks and Barker reservoirs, faster than ever before, faster than the models had ever predicted. Engineers at the Army Corps' command center watched their monitors in disbelief. The water level in the reservoirs was rising at a rate of over 6 inches per hour. They were not just approaching the top of the storage capacity, they were exceeding it. Water began to pool on the backside of the dams, flooding the very neighborhoods that were built inside the reservoir boundaries. But the far greater terror was what was happening to the dams themselves. The water was climbing toward the top of the earthen embankments. If the water overtopped the dams, it would scour away the back slope, leading to a complete, uncontrolled structural failure. The scenario was the stuff of nightmares. A breach at Addicks or Barker would release a volume of water equivalent to Niagara Falls directly into the western suburbs of Houston. It would be a disaster of unprecedented scale, likely killing thousands and causing billions in damages. The choice was brutal. On one hand, the certainty of a catastrophic dam failure if they did nothing. On the other, the deliberate flooding of thousands of homes. They made the call. In the middle of the night, with the rain still pouring down, the Army Corps of Engineers began opening the floodgates on both dams. It was a release unlike any they had ever performed. They weren't just letting water out, they were pushing it into a river system, Buffalo Bayou, that was already massively over its banks. It was a choice between who would flood, the homeowners upstream, living inside the government reservoir land, or the hundreds of thousands living downstream, in the path of a potential dam collapse. It wasn't a choice to prevent flooding, it was a choice to manage it, to aim it. For the residents upstream, the water came without warning. They had weathered the storm, thinking the worst was over. Then, the water started rising inside their homes. Not from the rain, but from the reservoir filling up behind them, a man-made flood. For the residents downstream, the opening of the gates added more water to an already flooded bayou, pushing the floodwaters higher into neighborhoods that had already been inundated. It was a desperate battlefield decision, and it has been litigated ever since. Thousands of homeowners sued the federal government, arguing that their property was effectively taken without compensation. The courts agreed, finding the government liable for the flooding of homes built upstream in the reservoir zones. It was a landmark ruling, a recognition that the gamble made by developers and planners decades ago had finally come due. The bill had arrived. And if you think this story of hidden risk and impossible choices is a vital one to share, please hit the like button. It tells the algorithm that this is a conversation worth having. And if you have a friend or family member living in a flood-prone area, share this video with them. Understanding the system is the first step towards safety. The aftermath of Harvey was a moment of reckoning. The unprecedented storm had laid bare the vulnerabilities that the engineers had quietly feared for years. The dams had held, just barely, but the system had failed. The idea of a dry reservoir in a city that had grown into it was exposed as a fiction. The Corps of Engineers launched new studies armed with the horrifying data from Harvey. They reevaluated the very concept of a maximum probable storm. The old models were thrown out. The numbers were too small. The climate of the 1940s was gone. A new reality required a new kind of preparation. The immediate upgrades to the dam gates were a stopgap. A more profound question lingered. What do you do when the fundamental assumptions your city is built on are proven wrong? The dams were designed to withstand a certain amount of rainfall over a certain amount of time. Harvey exceeded those parameters in every way imaginable. Climate scientists now warn that storms of Harvey's intensity are no longer 1 in 1,000 year events. They are becoming more frequent, fueled by a warmer atmosphere and warmer ocean waters. The next time, the dams might not hold. I know I've asked before, but it's that important. We see your comments, we see the shares, but a huge majority of you who find this content vital forget to subscribe. Seriously, if you've watched this far, you are part of the core crew. Take 1 second and click that button. Think of it as your vote to keep these deep dives coming. I promise, no more nagging, for at least a few minutes. The solution is not as simple as building the dams higher. The problem is space. The reservoirs are hemmed in by development. To expand them would mean buying out and demolishing thousands of homes, a politically and financially impossible task. Another proposal involves digging a massive third reservoir, but the price tag runs into the billions, and finding a suitable tract of land in the sprawling Houston metro is a monumental challenge. The most controversial idea is a coastal spine, a massive barrier of seawalls and gates along Galveston Bay to protect against hurricane storm surge. It's an idea that has been debated for years, with a cost estimated at over $30 billion. Each solution is a mega project in its own right, carrying its own complexities and costs. In the meantime, the Addicks and Barker dams remain. They are stronger than they were before Harvey. The new gates allow for much faster releases of water, giving operators more control. But they are still two earthen structures from the 1940s, standing guard over a 21st century metropolis that has gambled its safety on their performance. They are a monument to an engineering vision that was both brilliant and tragically short-sighted. They solved the problem of riverine flooding for downtown Houston. They could not solve the problem of unrestrained growth. The uncomfortable truth is that Houston engineered itself into this corner. The dams created a sense of security that fueled the very development that now puts them under so much pressure. It is a paradox playing out across the country, where infrastructure designed for one world is now struggling to cope with the realities of another. The dams were never the problem, they were the solution. The problem was the belief that any solution is permanent. The belief that nature, once tamed, stays tamed. Houston is not a cautionary tale, not yet. It is a work in progress. A city grappling with a legacy of its own success. The engineers at the Army Corps monitor the dams with a vigilance sharpened by the trauma of Harvey. The rainfall models are more sophisticated, the communication with the public is more transparent, but they are still reacting to a threat that is constantly evolving. The next storm is not a question of if, but when, and how much rain it will bring. What happened in Houston is a microcosm of a larger national crisis. Aging infrastructure, accelerated climate change, and the momentum of past development decisions are colliding. Phoenix is facing a future with less water from the Colorado River. Miami is confronting sea level rise that bubbles up from below. New Orleans is surrounded by a levee system that is constantly sinking. Each city is facing its own version of the impossible choice. The Addicks and Barker dams expose the fragility of our systems. They are a reminder that safety is not a static condition, it is an active process. A constant negotiation between what we have built and what the world is becoming. The gates are stronger, the computers are faster, the engineers are watching. But out in the Gulf, the water is still getting warmer, and somewhere over the horizon, the clock is still running.